have a comment on financial issues, not to specific individuals. If you need to address something that involves a specific individual, you make an appointment with board clerk to see the superintendent. 2 minutes. Please speak directly into the microphone. Identify yourself, and our board clerk will let you know when you're approaching 2 minutes. So with that, is there anyone who would like to address the board at this point in time? Okay, hearing no takers, I'll turn the floor over to, approval of the minutes, sorry. Jumped the gun. Approval of the minutes for January 24th, I'll entertain a motion.
Second.
Any additions or corrections to the minutes of January 24th? All right, all those in favor of accepting the minutes of January 24th, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
Abstentions? Okay. Now, I'll turn the floor over to the superintendent for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have several reports tonight, so we are going to start off with our owner's representative, Mr. Tom Clapper, and our architects for our Mahar building project, CS Arch.
That's us.
And BBL is here, I'm sorry. We also have BBL.
No, it's not me. It's the other one.
Sorry, Mr. Tillman, I didn't mean to leave you guys out.
We're glad to be here on a snow-free night. So Carly, myself, Rich, and Caitlin, we're going to do some updates on the Mahar project where we stand. It's been a while since we last talked before the public, so that'll be a good time to see where we are right now. Rich and Caitlin, you guys want to kind of run through some highlights?
We will run through some highlights here. First, we just wanted to kind of go through a reminder of what the overall scope of work for the project is, and then we'll get into some more of the details of the plan. So, the significant scopes of work, we're creating a pre-K entrance and office area to support the pre-K. The pre-K classrooms are really existing classrooms that the district will be providing new finishes in to support that program there. We're renovating the building for the district office function. We'll be moving out of this building. We're doing selected window replacements in the building. Basically, the oldest two vintages of the building will be replacing the windows. Being a multi-story building, we need to install an elevator. We're constructing entrance canopy that we'll show you some renderings of. That's one thing for budgetary purposes. We may want to consider bidding that canopy as an alternate. We're going to be doing updated HVAC and electrical systems in the building to be able to support the new use as district offices. The parking lot will be repaired, sealed, and restriped, and we'll be creating some drop-off areas in the parking lot for the pre-K functions coming to the building. So just as an overall floor plan of the building that is where we're working. The orange color is essentially the spaces that are designated for the pre-K function, the 4 classrooms across the back, the story area, the gymnasium that they'll be using, and then this is the area that we're creating as part of the project to create an office area and a reception area for the pre-K function in the building. The rest of the area is, the blue area is the business department for the building, and then the red area here is the IT department for the district. And in the middle, I should just point out, in the middle, this is the boardroom. So we'll look at it again on the site, but I know that in previous meetings there's been a question on where people enter for different functions. So the main K entrance for bus drop-off is going to be off the parking lot. When we look at the site plan, we'll show that in here next to the office. We'll show you for the parents dropping off for pre-K, the thought is they're going to drop off in the front and come in the entrance here to the building to separate that parent traffic and the bus traffic for the pre-K students. And then this entrance here will be the main public entrance for the building for district office functions and going to board meetings. So if somebody's going to a board meeting, they park in the parking lot here. come in this entrance and then come into this lobby area, into the boardroom. If they're going to pay their taxes, this is the tax office here. Register new students is in this area here. So keeping all that public function right off that entrance point from the parking lot. So this is just a little axionometric of a little more detail of the building, not a lot of changes going on in that area of the building, more moving functions and furniture in to be able to accommodate the new function in that section of the building. Just moving on to the rest of this area of the building, again, that's the larger space of the boardroom, the server room for the district, the main IT connection for the whole district will be there in that function, and then the registration and personnel area in that part of the building. Again, the pre-K area, the 4 pre-K classrooms, the one modification we are making in one of the classrooms through the bond project is to enlarge one of the toilet rooms so you have one that will accommodate a handicapped student. If you have handicapped students in the pre-K function, something that state ed would be requiring for the function of the building. And again, in the axonometric, you can see the boardroom in this area. You see the story area for pre-K there. Just moving on to the second floor. Again, we've got the different departments identified on the second floor in the different areas. Here and here are conference rooms for the building that can be used for meetings in the building. The superintendent's office, deputy superintendents, and then special ed in this area of the building mainly, and then the transportation department. So each department has a separate area of the building. And again, over in this area, this is the upper part of the gym, an additional pre-K classrooms for the future. If we expand to 6 classrooms versus the 4, they're just on the first floor right now. It should be noted that the pre-K will also be using the existing kitchen that's in the building. The district will be doing some upgrades there to be able to provide the serving of the food for the pre-K. And again, just looking at axonometric, the different areas of the building. This area here is basically a large classroom right now. We're adding some partitions to make the offices there. Similar on this side, we're just having to add some partitioning in to make the office areas appropriate for the function. And then we're creating new toilet rooms in this area of the building for the use of the building, and a break room here, kitchenette area for the staff in the building. Center part of the building again, conference room here, superintendent's office and support for the superintendent and deputy superintendent here, and then mainly the special ed services for the building in the back part of the building. Here's where we wanted to look at the entrances to the building from the parking lot, and you can see 2 different renderings for the pre-K entrance. This is the pre-K door at this location. So this is showing the canopy coming out that would shelter some of that. That door is already recessed 3 feet in, so there's a way to get undercover to open the door even if we don't build the canopy. So you can see in the bottom rendering the same view without the canopy constructed. And BBL will talk more about budget and things, but we always feel it's just good to have something that we can modify the bids if they, depending on where they come in at relative to the budget.
I have a question about just this.
Yes.
So the pre-K entrances on the left side of the canopy there, but then isn't the entrance to the business office, wouldn't that also be covered by the canopy?
Yes, it would, and I'll show that in the next slide. So this is then the canopy that's coming out. You'll see the end of the canopy here that's covering the pre-K doors here, and the door into the district offices is back under the canopy there. And Tom made the comment, one of the best things the canopy does is prevents them from having to clear as much snow in that area, in that recess where it's tough to get equipment in there to clear the snow. So you can see both views with the canopy and without the canopy for that. The other thing you see in this view is the elevator tower that we're building as an addition to the building to construct that elevator to be installed. This is the site plan for the building. So coming in and off the street, all of this is pretty much paved right now, and what you see in hatch pattern is we're striping that, painting that out to create this island drop-off, sorry about that, island drop-off here. So this is where we're looking at the parents dropping off, so they can drop off, the kids will walk into the building here and be greeted, and then they can come out and leave without having to circulate around the back of the building and get into the bus traffic. The buses would come in and drop off in the back. We're putting in a new sidewalk in the back here to lead to those entrances and be a drop-off area, so then they would loop back around and leave the site. The rest of the area is parking for pre-K staff and district staff, both in the back of the building and in the front of the building. So that kind of gives the overall sense of the site and the circulation of the site. This area here where we have the parent drop-off, we'll put a row of bollards there to protect anybody that's driving in there and kids have been dropped off. Get past that row of bollards, and then they don't have to worry about traffic in that area anymore. And so now Mike will talk a little bit about where we're at schedule-wise and where we're heading.
So, in partnership with CXR, we included documents trying to get to the construction document level, go to state at here in the March period. And SCD has echoed to us that they're looking at a May 2018 approval process. So once that takes place, then we'll start the bidding cycle. And Carl, yes, sir.
May 2018 or 2019?
2018 to
So-
have SCD approval. The next, this
2 months?
2 to 4 months from now, yeah.
They have,
Yeah, you might want to talk to you.
because of the fact that I've talked with Roseanne Groff at State Ed and the project manager there, and because you're going to have this deadline of getting out of this building because of selling it, they can make accommodations there to do a faster review than if otherwise you just had to wait in line, and that's why we can show that.
Correct, and SCD is still at the 8 to 9 month mark in general for all their project reviews. As we get into the bidding and award cycle, maybe Carly, you want to talk a little bit about the efforts that we've been doing right now as you're there.
We're currently starting to get engaged with contractors, try to get them interested in this project. So when we do come time to the bidding phase, we'll have a slippable amount of contractors who want to do this work for us. And then following SCD approval, we can start the bidding and then award our contracts to them early summer, bringing us to a late summer construction start. This will kick off all of our kickoff meetings, all of our submittal phases, starting with abatement and demo and so forth. And then moving on to wrapping up this project in June 2019 roughly, and then you guys turning into the building in July and August 2019 for the start of the new school year for you guys to occupy this building.
So our collective efforts, we're still working hard, trying to revisit the school, look at many details as we can to make it effective and cost effective as well. So right now, in general, we're on track, schedule-wise, for really jumping ahead for the fall of 2019 for the pre-K, and we're on budget right now.
Could you repeat the alternate about the canopy that is not in the plans? That's an extra cost?
What we're doing is we are including the canopy in all the design work and it will be part of the SCD approval. But it's just one of those distinct elements that if for some reason, for market conditions or whatever, the bids are very tight relative to the budget, we'll have the flexibility of making a decision after we receive bids, whether we can afford the canopy, and then we'll make that decision to either include it or not include it.
No, I think it's fabulous. I'm excited about it. Thank you for the information.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Stay right here.
Owner's rep, Mr. Clapper. And
So along with all the efforts of the design team, right now I have 2 carpenters in the building. We're removing the floors in the classrooms of the where the pre-K is going to be. We're putting down new flooring, putting ceiling tiles in, painting the rooms. I'm working with Ed Corelli. We took a bunch of equipment out of the high school main kitchen, and he's looking at that equipment to supply the kitchen for Mahar. And he's got a few items that he has to buy, but we're working on renovating that area too. So we're hoping before heavy construction starts in the building that our part of it will be done and we'll be out of it.
And just to add, not to interrupt, but just to add, we are, Tom and his team and Dr. Felicello and her team have been working together to create kind of a model classroom that will be there, and we're hoping, we're planning that in late March, we will have parents of preschoolers meetings, so parents who are interested can come and see what the classroom would look like and getting the, just kind of see Mahar. So we're hoping to kind of recruit some of our 5-year-olds, the parents of our 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds before they, before we're open, so they can come in and see what we're going to have there.
But we're gonna target the population we're
Yes, ma'am.
targeting.
Yeah.
So up at the high school, real shortly, we are, everything's going along very well. This is actually today, they were just finishing up the tile in the lobby between the old Salzman area that's under renovation and the wing. So this is at the one end of the hallway on the west end. The drinking fountains went in last week, they're done. You can see the corner of the Tiger store, and the mosaic is up on the wall. All the tile is done in that area. Probably either tomorrow or by Monday, all of that area, that entire lobby area will be done, except for the counter in the store. That's going to be maybe a week or so out. In Salzman proper, this is where the last kitchen was. This is all trenching for new piping and construction in the area. There's mechanical work going on, electrical work. They're doing plumbing in the floor. There's a lot of activity. Some new pipe. You have to take a lot of pictures of pipe. I'm a plumber. But quite frankly, we're getting to now we're condensing the whole project down. We're down to maybe 6,000 or 7,000 square feet between 2 floors. So all the activity is in that area. This is a picture from the inside of the south addition. This is the stairwell, and there are openings from the stairwell out to the lobby. And this is the top of that. It just looked like I should take a picture of him. He's out there putting up block. And this is the picture from the other side. So that man, that Mason was in there that was putting up the block is behind that the plastic. They're outside hanging all the structural stuff, I'm trying to say framing, onto the steel so that we can close the building in soon. Along with this, MJM is just about completely filled in. It's been a long haul because the ground keeps freezing and thawing and we're having trouble getting our compaction, but we're meeting all our standards. And the work is already starting to put the road in. So they're hoping to have this all done probably by middle of May, give or take. And we're looking to have all the construction done by somewhere in June, first week of June or so. And this is a few of the classrooms on the second floor. Again, I just made a brief, I knew there were several things tonight. This is the north end of the hall, and it's painted, it's ready to go, ceiling grids are in, and the only reason that we haven't populated the ceiling yet is because they still have to do HVAC balancing and stuff, and that's what those little yellow tags are. That's where the HVAC units, drop units come out, the distribution system. And that is about as brief as I can be. If you have any questions?
Questions, comments?
Yay!
Yay!
Thank you, Mr. Clapper.
And there will be no more snow this year.
Tomorrow will be the first morning in a long time I haven't spoken to Mr. Clapper at 4 a.m.
We talked quite a bit.
Morning chats. Okay, next we have the principal's report from our new principal at the Miller Middle School, Mr. Andy Sheever, and I see he's here as his vice principal, Mr. Tim Reed, is here with him as well.
All right, well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for having us. And first of all, I just want to start off by saying thank you for entrusting us with, we just left that wonderful presentation by Mr. Clapper of all the changes at the high school. A little bit of sore spot there, but at the same time, a lot of changes in Miller, where those are structural, these are more personal and cultural, so just I'm going to segue there. But yeah, Miller Middle School, new beginnings. Start off a little video. Just a little video speak to the new hikes that we're making. But again, a lot of new beginnings. So obviously we have new main office starting with myself and Mr. Reed as the principal vice principal. But we also want to speak to the idea that we're creating a new feel to the school, not just in the principals, but also in the main office. So we actually had a structural change. We took out the bar that used to be there. We're creating a much more welcoming, we believe, atmosphere, a much more helpful atmosphere than what had previously been established. We have a new office manager in Jeanette Ellis, came over from the high school. Karen Gotthoff has been there, but is still a really vital member of our new team. And we have a new greeter at the front desk, and Lisa Ressa, who's been really fabulous as well.
So a couple of new staff that we have for our support service is we're excited with our new SRO officer, Officer Dan Killian, and I invite all of you to come over to meet Dan. He's been a great addition to our staff. We have a new school psychologist, Sarah DeRobertis. The new attendance worker, Anne-Marie DeBella, has been fantastic. And we have a new nurse for staff, who is Robin Queck.
We even have a new department this year, where we started the school year with 15 our first cohort of ENL students. We're up to 24 English language learners now, as of this week. And a fabulous new Department of One in Deborah Franklin, as we meet the needs of students from a variety of countries from grades 5 through 8. So it's been a new journey that way as well. It's been a fabulous, fabulous experiment thus far. Students are really integrating well into all the classes. I've doing observations in all the classes. And I'm seeing these students really becoming part of the fold of another atmosphere. It's been wonderful.
We have a few other new teachers, including Monet Shannon, Humanities 6, Ashley Jankowski, who's our STEM teacher in 5th grade, Alicia Garrett, ELA 7th, Emily Williams, Health, Dan Gittes, Music, Mason McElrath, and Casey Zunick are both two new special ed teachers to the building, and Kenita Carty is our new reading RTI teacher.
A lot of new, nice mixture of brand new teachers and some seasoned veterans that have come from other districts, so they're bringing both freshness but also wisdom to our team. It's been a great year full of a lot of new hires. But why? Why so much new? So to just touch base a little bit, as you're probably very much aware of, last year's DTSDE surveys of the 3 principal stakeholder groups, parents, the students, and the teachers, expressed a good deal of displeasure with what was their perception at the time. The main, without getting into the data, because you guys saw all that stuff last year, but the main concerns, parents had a great deal of concern about the lack of communication or the poor communication that they were perceiving and reporting. Teachers felt that discipline wasn't consistent and maybe not as timely as they would like, and that was leading to other environmental issues in the building. And the students spoke to a perception of a lack of safety. So those are the 3 main points that really we took as our call to arms to really try to address those main things: communication, discipline, and safety.
Okay, so communication was an issue in the survey, so we've done a few things that we think are bringing us closer to improving those areas. One is the redesign of the main office to enhance a welcoming atmosphere, establishing the use of the eSchool Data parent portal this year, phone messaging system audit and adjustments. One of the concerns that we had in the past from the survey from last year that was brought to our attention is that parents and community weren't feeling they were getting through to staff and administration. or getting timely responses back. So we're constantly auditing our phones, making sure that parents, that those messages are getting picked up and people are getting called back. An updated system for posting announcements on the school's website, and we've revitalized our Miller Middle School page on Facebook, which has been a great tool to communicating with parents in a timely manner in terms of all the things that we're doing in the building.
Tim's adding stuff on Facebook at least 5-6 times a week now. And then to the general safety idea, it's important that we work from the foundation up. So it's not just about providing personnel for safety, but really speaking to the emotional safety and social safety. So as you've already heard from Mr. Bello's report a few weeks back, there's this Attendance Matters initiative where we're working in conjunction, and they're working in conjunction as well with businesses across town, as well as the Midtown Center and the Hodge Center for Attendance Matters. We've been working with, and you've heard from Ms. Fitzgerald a few months ago, with the Benedictine Foundation to do a DBT program that we called Do Better Today. When Ms. Fitzgerald presented, it was about to happen. I can speak to now 10 weeks into the program. We did our first cohort of 5th and 6th graders that we're meeting a couple times a week with a clinician from Benedictine. Purely voluntary, and it's been fabulous. The decrease in those students that we did kind of handpick with their cooperation and their parents' permission, we've seen a real decrease in some of their behavioral choices they made prior to working in the program. In fact, Mr. Dixon even commented a few moments ago as we were sitting in about one young woman in particular and the change he's seen ever since she's been in that program. So even a man who's in the building only once or twice every couple of weeks is seeing a difference in some of these kids thanks to this Do Better Today program. It's been an ongoing program that we work with the Institute of Family Health. Natalie Mesa is also new to our building at the end of last year. That's her in the bottom left there. Restorative practices. We've been talking about the, again, Ms. Fitzgerald spoke to this with her building a few months ago, but it's just an ongoing dialogue. It's an ongoing growth in terms of how we both support our students, but also address situations when they do arise. So everything from creating posters and doing cooperative circles and some reentry meetings and various situations other than going traditional with our discipline, in conjunction with going traditional when we have to, has really been the thrust of our restorative practices. And much like across the district, we've been focusing on PBIS as our vehicle to really start teaching the behaviors that we know that our students need the reinforcement in. Among the various initiatives, we are rolling out this week, later this week, our Mustang Money program, whereby students will be getting each of these bills. You can't really see them on a picture of the Mustang, and our 3 key virtues of respect, responsibility, and readiness to learn are indicated on the front. A student would have one of those circled, and in the back indicate who issued them. They'll be able to turn this in at the Miller store for various and sundry items, some of which will be little things, but then also some larger ticket items, thereby encouraging students to save up their money and to delay gratification for bigger items so they can learn again some of the value of working toward a goal. And now, a video along those lines.
So one of the things for safety and prevention that we took a look at was our traffic pattern. We had complaints and concerns about how students were dropped off and picked up at Miller. We've changed the pattern around. We have 2 drop-off lanes now, and we have 2 adults monitoring crosswalks in the morning to keep the traffic flow going and ensure that the kids safely enter the building. In addition, with safety and prevention, we've had defined passing times and tones for when kids are needed to be in class. We have an additional 10 security cameras. But I think the most important thing that I've seen this year is that Mr. Schieber and I have put an emphasis with security officers and our SO officer on building relationships with the students and kind of expanding their role in the building as being more than sort of silent members of our community that just sort of watch and kind of interject when needed, but rather to really kind of take the initiative in terms of building relationships and communicating with students in a positive way.
Which was really seeing, you know, the difference, one easily encapsulate that is in the past, we had guys sitting in a corner like this, but now they're sitting at tables, eating, you know, not really eating with the kids, but talking with the kids as they're eating, and you really see much more of that kind of relationship building, which has been nice in terms of de-escalation and preventative measures to keep them from getting as bad as they might otherwise have gotten. Oops, the other piece is to bring in and talk with and make ourselves more accessible to the community by the that communication thing I spoke to before, in addition to just the main office phones. So we've done a number of outreach and also in episodes throughout the year that we've brought people in. So just to speak to a few of those. We recently did an ice cream social back in the fall at the Boys and Girls Club, where we invited parents and children to come to the Boys and Girls Club and share some ice cream that was graciously donated by the stewards. We recently did, as did Bailey, a food truck challenge, which is part of the CSL curriculum, but turned into a wonderful event because we had a lot of parents coming in to see their children participate in this. And what was really nice that Mr. Reed I noticed and pointed out was there was a lot of the different parents that we don't always see. And some of the other events that, sporting events or music events, these were sometimes some different parents that was trying to know and participate in that. Science Night Out is an annual thing. It was I think the 4th annual or 5th annual this year, but I'm told our numbers were greatly increased from previous years. The same night was the Parent Information Night that we did in conjunction with the Teaching and Learning Department, and then Limington Junior, just a really fabulous show. So a brief video about those things. It was a little awkward eating with all those people watching. And I've had enough grilled cheeses for a while. In addition to that, we've also, just wanted to share with you some of the interesting academic and cultural events that have happened at the middle school as well. Where between Andrews Monta, which was a performing group that did rainforest music with the kids, actually did workshops with the kids as well, brought them on stage, so it was a multi-part thing, presentation as well as workshops with some of our international club. Backtrack is a vocal a cappella group that came and did a presentation as well. They too worked with our music students in a workshop scenario as well as provided the presentations. One of our TAs, Michelle Moore, her son is Lance Corporal Moore. He came back and spoke with some of our students, and that was really kind of exciting for some of them as well. As you know, we do the Wild Earth program. So this past fall, we had the Guided Recess program as well as some field trips. And just the other day, I was invited to the International Club's Chinese New Year celebration, where again, people got to watch me eat. And a brief video. And so just want to leave you with, while we're still in the process of collecting the survey data for this year's survey, as you know, we did have our district-led review earlier this year. And so just a little touch on that. While they were in our building for over 2 days, they visited 28 classrooms, interviewed myself, but also did some focus group interviews with students, parents, and teachers, as well as our support team. And this is my favorite part, I must admit. The statement, and this right from the report, successes within the school that the school should build upon. Parents and staff all state that they have experienced a change in the school and are happy with the environment and culture at MCM Clifford Miller Middle School. Students state they have also seen a positive change in the school since last year, that rules are fair and firm, and expectations are high for positive behavior. And lastly, that students feel that they feel academically safe to take risks, and that peers and teachers are partners in their learning with reinforcement and clarification. So, hesitantly say I think we're on the right track, and I thank you again for your support in our getting us there.
Mr. Schipper, Mr. Reed, thank you for the nice presentation and also for the nice videos. I had a chance to see my great niece a couple times. But I'm very pleased by the effort you made and the emphasis you give on the SROs, the security officers, and the role they play in the building. As I believe, and the rest of the board agrees with me, they only have one role to build a relationship with the students. We know that they are for the safety of the students, but their role is to build the relationships. And I hope you give continue that emphasis.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Sure. I'd like to thank both of you for coming, and it's so gratifying to see that there can be positive change in such a short time with the cooperation of everybody, with your leadership. The two of you have made such a big difference and a positive difference. And I also am so thrilled that there's so much coordination between the two middle schools, because that's one of the things that I really longed for, is consistency within both of the schools, because the kids move back and forth so frequently. And it's so important to them to have that home feeling when they walk in, that not everything is so different just because you moved across town. So the fact that you work together and that you're able to build some consistency across those programs is very important to me, and I appreciate it very much.
Thanks. Yeah, we very much strive to do that. Ms. Fitzgerald and I talk a lot about that sort of thing. I'll admit, there's a little competition going on. And she's got a little bit of a head start, but we're catching up fast. And we're doing our best. But yeah, no, and that's just it. And again, thanks to your wisdom, really all of you, in supporting the changes that have happened, because, you know, we all were together at the high school not that long ago, where we saw the need for that sort of thing. And we understood the differences from the two buildings and how we needed to kind of minimize that. So that's very much been our focus, that, you know, neither of us does anything without talking together. How would you do this, or how do you do that? And let's do this together, and Paul, Beth, and, you know, or John, and we're working very consciously on that.
Thank you.
Just
Mrs. Collins.
briefly, and back on what Mrs. Jordan said, and, you know, maybe you did have a leg up, you're right, from working together at the high school and having that camaraderie, but I also see enthusiasm, I think, which is great. And there were 3 words that stand out to me there, and it's positive, fair, and firm. And, you know, I always say teaching and being administrator is an extension of parenting, it really is. And I think those are the things that we look for, and I think those are the things that you're giving our students, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, so next up is good evening again. As part of the goal-setting process, the board has set a goal to get a report on the instructional coaching model this month, so we wanted to put that together and give a brief presentation to the board on that. First, I want to start by thanking Dr. Falicello and Ms. Bonville and their teams for actually putting this together. I'm just presenting. They really did the work and really do the work day in and day out with the coaching and the coaching model, so I want to make sure I thank them. So what is the purpose of the coaching model? We put this into place about 5 years ago, and the purpose really is the instructional coaches is to help close the student achievement gap, to accelerate learning for all students by building teacher capacity through implementation of effective instructional practices. Okay, what's that mean? That means we use embedded professional development to help our teachers. You know, we really wanted to get away from the one-shot deals on superintendent's conference days, and all the research tells us that embedded professional development is the way to do this. So what is that? That means we have our instructional teachers in the classrooms, in the buildings, working with the teachers during the school day, helping with students, modeling lessons and those kind of things, not just coming to a big group in the gym at Bailey Middle School and hearing from some consultant we bring from out of town. These are our people talking to our people to help our students. So instructional coaches, what do? So they work in real time, side by side with their colleagues, in collaboration on work on best practices, instruction, data analysis, student achievement. And the key thing here, I'm going to say a couple of times here, is they work using the Danielson framework for teaching. We use that rubric. So we'll talk about that a little more, but really this whole thing is about how do we evaluate our teachers, how do we evaluate our programs. We use the Danielson framework for teaching. And so these are the areas that our instructional coaches work with our teachers. I won't read to the entire thing, but these are the many things that our instructional coaches do. One of the other things at the bottom I do want to point out, they also do help with our putting in our DSIP plans and our SET plans, really making sure that we are putting those things together and working closely with that. And one of the big pieces is the RTI, Tier 1 and 2 classroom supports. You all know that I've said RTI is one of the most important things we do here in the Kingston City School District, and a program that needs support, and our coaches give that support. The role of the instructional coach, again, at the elementary level and our high school level, or our secondary level, I should say. The roles are very similar, obviously, but they do different things at each level. To give you an idea, these are our elementary coaches. Right now, you'll see that each have an area of focus. Now, that doesn't mean they can't help in other areas, but these are their areas of focus. So we have 5 instructional coaches at the elementary level. And our secondary coaches, we have 4 at the secondary level, which is just the middle school. We do not have coaches at Kingston High School. I think that's an important piece that I might not have said. And again, you see they have their areas of focus, but that's not all that they can do. Elementary and secondary have different models. So we have how they operate here. The elementary, they go through each school. All right? They kind of rotate through schools and make sure that they hit the school a certain number of days during their 6-day cycle. And at the secondary level, the coaches have 2 teachers that they work with, and they work with them straight for 12 instructional days. So they'll work intensely for 12 days with those 2 individual students or individual teachers. Some of the work that our elementary coaches do, again, they don't just do the embedded professional development, they also will do some trainings. They'll do after-school trainings. During our superintendent's conference days, they'll do some of those workshops. They also help us in implementing some of our new technology that collects our data, like our IAP Direct training, and they also work with our DataMate training at the beginning of the school year. One of my favorites is the differentiated math tier tub workshop, which is actually a tub full of math stuff that is tiered for students as they learn in their learning levels that will be distributed through the classes. And I thought that was really funny, so I had to point that out. Secondary instructional coaches, the things that they do, again, many different things that they do. A really interesting thing that's going on right now is the New York State Science Learning Standards, which are the next-gen standards that are rolling out. They're going to roll out in all of the areas. The next-gen ELA standards are rolling out, but they're not the NYSSLS yet. But this is really a big piece that's coming out of the new curriculum, and I know our assistant directors are experts, and our coaches are turning into experts in helping implement those things. An important piece, what an instructional coach is not. Okay, sometimes this is important to know what something is not as much as to know what it is. So, instructional coach is not an evaluative teacher of teachers. Instructional coach is a teacher. They are not someone who provides information that would or could be used for teacher evaluation. There is no evaluatory process within the instructional model whatsoever. They are not a substitute teacher, although, if needed, coverage of the building, they can be a substitute teacher, but they are not a substitute teacher. They come in to model lessons, and they come in to show teachers new and different strategies in the classroom, but they are not a substitute teacher, and they are definitely not a principal designee. As I said, they are a teacher, just like the teachers that they assist. Instructional coaches have targeted their coaching to ensure alignment with the Danielson framework for teaching, as I said earlier. Going back to what our coaches are not, in order to guarantee confidentiality for our teachers, our coaches only log 3 things: the date, the domain that they're working on, and the amount of time they work with those teachers. And this is the Danielson framework, and really this is what we do, how we measure everything we do really as far as teaching and learning is concerned, is using these 4 domains. So I blew them up a little bit here, so you can see here. So we had our planning and preparation domain, our classroom environment domain, professional responsibilities domain, and instruction domain. And any teachers that are here know these very well, because these are the 4 domains where we are rated in our APPRs. Elementary instructional coaches, so much what they've done, again, as you saw how the 2 programs, 2 models are different. We've had about 949 hours spent with our teachers, and 189 staff members at the elementary level have been worked with. And again, it's not just classroom teachers, it's reading teachers, ENL teachers, it's our library media specialists. So they're working with everyone that they possibly, that wants to work with them. At the secondary level, you see fewer teachers, but that 12-day cycle piece, creates a different. It's a different model, and making sure that we're doing all the things that we need to do at the secondary level. There is that NYSSLS again. It needs to be implemented correctly. It's new. It's different. And it's kind of interesting because when we started the instructional coach model, one of the things we were doing was implementing the Common Core, and we wanted to have that extra assistance. Now we're implementing a new curriculum here. We collect data. That's what we do. That's what we do up here at Central Avenue. We figure out what we're doing, we collect data and see if it's working. So we're continuously collecting data on our coaching and what we're doing with in the classrooms with our coaches. So one of the things we want to see, what domains were our teachers asking for help with? So in this year so far, at the elementary level, we track what they're asking for. So if you see, your yellow is your domain 1, which is planning and preparation. Your blue is domain 2, classroom environment. Your pink, maroon is domain 3 is instruction, and 4 is domain professional responsibility. So these are October, November, December, the things that coaches were asked to work with, the teachers had asked them to help them work with. So it's kind of an increase in the planning and preparation. I think that might have got to be about the evaluation cycle, where this is where we're getting into our formal evaluation, so working on formal lesson plans and things like that may be things that are being asked for. So we collect that information. Not only does this information help us to know what our coaches are doing, but it also helps us when we do provide that bigger professional development program. So we say, okay, these are the areas that they're asking for, so we can do that. More, just again, looking at the trends. And then more data that we're collecting. What do we want to know? We want to know, after teaching, one of our coaches goes in with a teacher, we want to know how to go. And so then they want to know how to go. So they have an exit ticket at the elementary level. We're also collecting data at the secondary level. Do it a little differently, but we're still looking at the same type of things. What domains are really being called for by our teachers to help? We're still looking at that 28.9 is still in our in that whole same area of planning and preparation. Collecting more data, how is this helping with our APPRs? Each one of these areas where the coach is working, you can see we have our domains and what sub-part of the domain that they're working on. Secondary teachers, more collecting data. When they start with their coach, they have that initial forum, that initial meeting. They're asking them what are the things that I need to know about you before I come in your classroom or before we sit down and meet. And then on the way out the door, we want to know, how do we do? How do they do? To make sure we really meet the needs of a classroom teacher. What's that all mean? So I just talked about things about how do we know if this is working? So the most important thing we talk about in so many programs is the evidence of impact. So what is the evidence of impact? And really the best way to show the evidence of impact is through our APPR process, which is our teacher evaluation process. So what we do is we just randomly took some of these and looked at teachers with APPR who worked with coaches. And this is at the elementary level. And this teacher, again, in their first unannounced observation, saw in domain 2A, creating environmental respect and importance. So they had developing. They met with our coach, worked on those modeling positive interactions with both teachers and students, and through other areas of work with them, by the time they came to the announced observation, effective. In 2B, start out developing, effective. In 2D, start out developing, effective. So we're seeing the work that the coach is doing is helping our teachers go from developing to effective in certain areas in their APPR. Same here at the elementary school. Two different domains, but still the same thing. Working with our coach, improving their performance from developing to effective. At the high school level, these are a couple of these. Some big jumps. Working with our coach on domain 1, C, and E, from developing to highly effective, just with the strategies worked on with one of our instructional coaches, and here from developing to effective. And this is what I like even more, because this is a teacher who is already effective. So this is kind of one of those good to great things. And they still reached out to an instructional coach to say, hey, how can I be highly effective? And we saw through the working with them, this teacher did go from effective to highly effective. So, it's not, instructional coaching isn't just about teachers who maybe need or in developing or struggling with it. It can be for any teacher. We did a K-8 principal survey. As you can see, our principals are, if you remember last year, our principal presentations, almost every one of them mentioned the value of the coaches in their buildings, and you can see that they still feel that way. they've seen different ways the teachers are, making improvements in the classroom after working with instructional coaches. You can see there's just many different comments for our principals. More importantly, is feedback from our teachers. And not only do we solicit the feedback through our exit tickets and through our exit interviews, but sometimes we get unsolicited feedback, which is really, it's nice to have. So you can see there's a lot of support here from the teachers that work with this coach. This one even says love teachers at the bottom. So a lot of positive feedback from who our instructional coaches are working with. Questions?
Ms. Jordan?
Well, I've heard some of this information before because I'm on the T&L committee, and thank you all for preparing this, and I know a lot of thought goes into it, and I am also, a lot of debate goes into it, but I'm very pleased because I do think it's helpful to have I think peer intervention is invaluable. It's different than coming from an administrator, certainly, but I do have a concern, and I voiced this in our committee, about the length of time that a coach serves, and even how we can perhaps look at it at a building level so that there's a person there all day, or not all day, but every day. And there are certain models that have half-time teaching versus half-time coaching, or, and so, I have asked the committee to continually look for another, some alternative kinds of situations where teachers wouldn't be, our best teachers wouldn't be taken out of the classroom for long, long periods of time, because I think our best teachers should be with our students. So that's only my concern, or my only concern about it. I don't want to remove teachers who are so effective with students and then put them in this role for an extended period of time. So I'm hoping that we can come up with some ways that we can have more people engaged in the process, but maybe for a shorter period.
Yeah, one thing that is always an issue when you take a good teacher out of a classroom and put them in a role of this kind. One of the things that we find is being able to have those people serve this way really can impact a greater number of students in helping with multiple teachers. I think if we're looking at some level of number of years that people are doing, one of the things that is through all the coaching literature is creating those relationships is a big part of the coaching. So it's about, what is that? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? What is that time that we would want to look before we would change out and rotate through? So those are all.
Right, and that's why in some places I think they keep people in their own buildings because those relationships are already made. So that's why that's sometimes helpful to keep people in their buildings. But I do agree that they can have a huge impact, but I also think from our conversations, it's hard to get people to think of doing this, and it might be because teachers who love teaching don't want to leave their classrooms for a long period of time. So if they were given the opportunity to coach for a year or two and know that they would go back to their classrooms, they might be more willing to do that. So that's just the other side of it. But I really appreciate all the work. I know that there's so much energy and work put into it, and so I do support the program, but I'm always looking to make it better.
Mrs. Collins, did you have?
I thought it was very informative. I'm not on the team now, so I don't know all the things that's going on, but I thought that was very informative. And I'm glad to see that it's being effective. I like to see the results that were shown there of not only effective for the teachers that need to be improved, but those who are already good and going into better. So I thank you for it.
Mr. Shaughnessy.
Where do the coaches get their professional development?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've talked about that. Yeah, and they've been through several different areas of professional development. They've been down to GOCES for professional development on coaching and on new curriculum. So they get really, we have to kind of look outside for the professional development for them to help them really to be coaches. But one of the keys, one of the really important things about the coaching, I think, is just being able to be up to date on the curriculum, up to date on the best practices of teaching and learning in the classroom, and being able to help teachers with data and help teachers look at assessments and those kind of things. So there's a lot of different things that they do. And it's one of those things that we always talk about time. You know, and whenever I talk to any classroom teachers, I hear time. That never does we have a conversation when the time doesn't come into it. And the regular classroom teacher doesn't always have time to maybe be out learning about the next gen science standards, but our coaches can do that and then bring it back. So it's another way that they are really valuable to the classroom teacher.
I want to thank you, and I'm really very happy to see this formalized, because for years people have been doing it informally, and it's great that it's consistent and it's formalized both at the elementary and secondary level. So thank you very much. Thank you.
One more. Now, Mrs. Woodard and Mr. Olson will give us a very preliminary budget projection.
Thank you, sir. You're welcome. Just get a run, man.
Thank you.
Don't take it personally, Alan.
Don't take it personally. The room just
So we're here to, as Dr. Paolino mentioned, give you a very preliminary budget update. We're going to begin by talking about the Office of State Controller's stress assessments. There we go. It's the stress monitoring system, because we feel like that has some role to play, frankly, and obviously it looks at our financial health, looks at our environmental situation, and it does lead into the budget somewhat. So we'll just look at this pretty quickly. The stress monitoring system has a few basic components, but the two main things are that there are financial indicators, and there are environmental indicators. And so you get, every school district in the state gets a score on each of those things. In fact, it's not just school districts who are evaluated with this system, it's also towns, villages, I think every municipality in the state.
And these results were just released about 2 weeks ago. So that's one of the timeliness why we're bringing it up now, so we can kind of go over and kind of review it. It is out on the State Comptroller's website for all of the municipalities, schools, and districts. This information is available, but we thought we would go through it tonight as part of the budget presentation.
So again, here are a couple more details about the stress monitoring system. I know this was in the library, so you can see all this stuff. The financial indicators are in a list there: the year-end fund balance, operating deficits and surpluses, etc. The environmental indicators are the 6 listed at the bottom. Percentage of economically disadvantaged students, class size, teacher turnover rate, change in property values, budget vote approval rate, and percent of English language learners. Obviously, the state, the Office of the Controller in many cases, feels like movements in these things and these actual raw numbers are indicative of what the environment is that may or may not put more or less stress on the district as we go forward.
Well, one thing I just want to mention too is that when we look at the financial indicators, we're looking at the measures of our past performance. So they're looking at our year-end operating results and our position, financial position at the end of the year. The environmental indicators are more of indicators that are kind of telling us what the future might hold and what stresses might affect us in the future, and our revenue-raising capability, as they say, and the demand for certain additional services.
Of course, the financial indicators also give you a peek into what your trend is. So in some ways they're similar. So we'll look at the stress. Again, these are from the state. So we'll start with the stress scores. Our fiscal stress score was 0, which is the best it can be,
No designation.
which is no designation. So if you're up here above 23 or so, you're in the susceptible stress area, moderate stress area above that, significant stress area. And you can see that on average, schools in the state and schools in this area are in the no designation area. So we are with them. These are a couple more specific indicators, and they both are involving fund balance. You want to roll through these?
Sure, so these are two of the financial indicators. They both involve year-end fund balance. The first indicator, number one, and these don't show where our scores were calculated from, but they just show our score relative to other districts in the state and all schools. So unassigned fund balance is the percentage of fund balance to total expenditures. And as we know, the unassigned fund balance is capped at 4%, and that would be 4% of your budget. So it's a little bit over 4% because we didn't fully expend our budget. So we're in a good place where our budget hasn't been, expenditures haven't been, we haven't spent way under our budget so that there's a huge surplus. But we are at a safe level where we still have that unassigned fund balance of at least 4%.
You can see that right here, at the 3% level, the state considers that to be the beginning of a stress area, and as you can see, it goes down that way. We tend to adhere very closely to the 4% because the 4% is actually the state guidance, state law. And you can see that others are above that, and our best guess about why that is that these districts are over budgeting and underspending, and so, as Beth mentioned, whereas the 4%, the 4.24% indicates that we underspend our budget a little bit, these districts are likely underspending their budget a lot, which is the kind of thing that the state controller doesn't really like particularly much, because they feel like you shouldn't budget that much, you shouldn't raise taxes that much if in fact you're not going to spend it.
The second indicator here is total fund balance. So whereas the unassigned fund balance is the 4%, that's the undesignated unassigned fund balance, the total fund balance includes all of our legal reserves as well. And you can see by this, kind of right about where some of the other districts are in the state. And those reserves, as we know, protect us future liabilities for possible things that could happen that could have a huge tax impact.
And they also tend to put us in a good stead when it comes time to borrow money for projects, say the high school project, that we are in a good financial situation. Well, by the way, these peer groups, we didn't mention what they are. So the all schools is the 674 school districts in the state. The Mid-Hudson Region schools are 100 schools. They're sort of up and down the Hudson River, so we think of the Hudson River as sort of Mid-Hudson as Ulster and Dutchess, but this is obviously way more than Ulster and Dutchess. I think it goes probably Putnam, Rockland, Sullivan perhaps, and then maybe even Greene in Columbia County. And then medium downstate schools is 108 schools, and again, downstate, I'm not sure what the definition of that is, but that's 108 schools. So we're comparing ourselves to a lot of schools that are similar to us in some cases, although all schools, as you know, there are school districts in the state that have fewer than 1,000 kids, and school districts that have many tens of thousands. Oh, we didn't want to talk about this one. Operating surplus and deficit. So, as you can see, we've had an operating surplus divided by gross expenditures of about 2%, which is, which has been a solid place. Although you can see other districts above that for reasons that are probably similar to that which I described earlier. Your own fund balance.
This is not category 3, sorry about that top. These are cash flow indicators, and these are just indicative of how you are in a position to pay your bills. and where you stand cash versus current liabilities at the end of the year, and it just shows that you have enough cash flow to pay your bills on a monthly basis, as well as to cover your current liabilities, and we're in a good position there too. I don't know what pushes all schools up to 292%, but 129% is where we were at the end of 2017.
And again, the controller's office deems that we're in a good position. Now, on the environmental stress, this is a summary of the entire environmental stress analysis. We didn't get the same documentation from the state for these as we did for the financial. But this is a summary of those 6 items. And the 4 that are highlighted are the ones where we actually got points, which is, it's not good to get points. So our poverty / percentage of economically advantaged students, which I think is probably related to free and reduced lunch, at 60%, that was worth 8.33 points in this analysis. Our change in property values, which was negative, meaning our property values on average fell, was worth 5 points. Our budget support, which I think sometimes we think if we get 65% of the people to vote for our budget, we're doing pretty darn well. The state thinks that that's an issue, worth 10 points. And
But 65 is only worth 5 points, so.
yeah, if we hit 65, we don't have 5 now. And English language learners, which is a growing population in the state, at the 5% level, and frankly now I think we're between 6 and 7, is that right? Was worth 10 points at 5, and I think the next threshold for that is 9%, and 9% would jack this up to, I think, 15. So, in any case, the number of points, we look down here, we're in the susceptible category, but just in it. The low end of that is 30, we're 33. So, we crept into this, and that's, some of these things are things that really are somewhat out of our control, as you can well imagine. You can read them and you can think, well, what would we do about that? Actually, the ones that we can do something about, we do something about, and the rest we really don't have too much control over. So that's the environmental stress, and so we are mildly into the susceptible environmental stress category. This is the governor's budget. This is the governor's budget in its entirety. This has nothing to do with our school specifically. This is the governor's budget, so you can see foundation aid, some of these things, transportation aid, all the things that you might recognize that we talked about, all the way down, and these totals. So these are separate, and no, I'm sorry, these are not separate. So the total here is not quite $800 million in new aid.
And this is an excerpt from a webinar I think some of you might have seen on the NIASBO, and we just pulled out a couple of slides to highlight just some of the general things that were in the governor's proposal that are going to potentially affect. Okay, this we just again pulled out a couple of slides just to highlight a few things that are in the governor's proposal. There's no discussion as far as we know. It does not repeal the phase-in or any part of the formula, foundation aid formula, so there's no talk of that. There is a $338 million increase in the foundation aid. Each district, there's 4 different categories of calculations. Each district, the minimum is 0.25%. Ours is about 1.9, I think. But of that total increase in foundation aid, $50 million has to be set aside for community schools. And that $50 million is included in the $338 million. So any increase that we receive in foundation aid, that community school set aside can only be used towards those targeted initiatives.
You may recall a few years ago there was a governor who didn't serve very long who talked about getting these foundation aid formulas in place and actually letting, as I say in Albany, letting the formula run. But he didn't serve long, that didn't happen, and it still isn't happening. base?
And then the expense-based aids in the current year, governor's proposal, there aren't any changes to the formulas, so they would still be based on what we expend, and the capital projects are based on the projects that we have approved, and the expenses that are approved and fall within our maximum allowable expenditures. And while they're fully funded for 18-19 in the governor's proposal, there are some things in the 19-20 that would impact us in the 19-20 year. And I know you had mentioned this at the last board meeting, but there's caps for transportation aid and BOCES aid at 2%. And the cap growth for BOCES transportation aid would be on a district by district basis. So whatever our aid is, we could not receive more than 2%. There's also a cap in growth in building aid, and that would also be 2%, but that's statewide. So the total amount that's available for building aid for the entire state would be capped at a growth, and then that would be prorated and deducted from the total for each district on a prorated basis. So because our BOCES aid, our building aid, and our transportation aid are pretty significant sources of revenue on our state aid side, so those could have definite impact on our future budgets.
Yeah.
And there are two here also that we didn't include here that I thought were also worth noting. One that are also included in the governor's proposal, one of which is that we're proposing a 0% increase in STAR, which has been 2%, so that 0% increase in the STAR. And the other one is a Summer 4408 program, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but we have about $1.8 million worth of expenses that we have over the summer for our students with disabilities that we continue their programs either in district or in private placement, and that currently the state funds that at 80%, and the governor's proposal includes a change in that would bring it down closer to probably 50 to 60%. So right now in our budget is about $400,000 that we contribute to that summer handicap program. And if that happened, it would be effective this summer, and it would probably double that number. And of course, these are things that we haven't included in the budget. We're hoping we will.
So this is our proposal. Again, you've seen it in your library. The last column is the variance between our working budget and last year's budget, and you can see this, fairly modest number, $836,000, which, as Beth mentioned earlier, is inclusive of $250,000 in community schools set aside. So, aside from the set aside, there's about $600,000, roughly speaking, in here, which is a growth rate of about 1.6%. So it's pretty modest. I'm sorry, about 1.4%. And you can see some of the other categories of a fairly modest growth. So the total growth illustrated here is about 1.1 million in all categories.
And that, just note that is from our current year budget to next year's working budget. So when the governor released the initial figures at the beginning of the month, the proposal included current year figures that had not encompassed everything that we've gotten. So it looked from the governor's proposal run that we were going to have a 10 or substantial increase in our aid, but a good portion of that was building aid, which we had already included in our budget. So as you can see, the building aid line is only going up from budget to budget by $186,000, not the $5 million that appeared on the governor's run. And we actually did apply for early aid. That's on the Second Century project, and we were approved, so we will now be getting that aid in the current year for that project.
So our tax levy limit calculation for this year, estimated, early estimate. So you can see that we have 12 10,000% is our tax growth factor for last year. It's 8 times larger this year, 97 10,000%. In addition,
the allowable growth factor, which is CPI, or the lesser of CPI or 2%. Last year it was 1.26%. This year, a full 2%. So substantially above. And those two factors primarily have driven this calculation, this early estimate, to last year our tax levy limit was 1.35%. Right now it looks like it'll be about 3.5%. Now, 3.5%, you might say, is there any way we're going to ask our taxpayers for 3.5%? And I would say the answer to that is unlikely. Unlikely.
Some of the factors, I just want to review a couple of the factors in this calculation. Last year, our initial tax levy limit was at 1.35%, which enabled us to have a maximum allowed tax levy of $101.7 million. However, the board approved to allocate additional fund balance, so we brought the tax levy up to this point, which was on 1.06% higher than the previous year. So in starting this with the new current 18-19 estimate, we start with the actual tax levy that we started with. So that number, we bring the actual tax levy up. The factors that are given to us, the tax-based growth factor is specific to our district, and the allowable growth factor, the lesser CPI or 2%, CPI was actually 2.13%, so the lesser would be 2%. This factor is the same factor used by all districts. The pilot and the prior year exemptions, they come directly from last year, so we don't change these numbers. They're brought forward in the calculation. So really, the only thing that we really have any control over, these are our pilots. Our pilots are kind of stable. We have a couple changes, one going off, one coming on. Pilots, so that the pilots for the coming year is a little lower. It's in the budget. And the other factor that drives this number is the capital tax levy. And the capital tax levy, because the capital tax levy is increasing, that adds to the increase in this percentage. And part of the capital tax levy is calculated by taking the total debt service that we expect to have in the budget for capital projects minus the estimated aids. And we are still working with our financial advisors to finalize our strategy on financing the Second Century project and future projects, as well as trying to final up when we're going to be able to file the final cost reports for a couple of the projects at the high school. So this number could change within the next few weeks or months prior to the time that we file this with the state, which is due on March 1st, before the budget is due. Although we can change it after that if we need to with the state.
But as you can imagine, it changes, even if this changed by 10% downward, it's not going to make this 3.56 greatly different. So it's still going to be, the tax levy limit is still going to be a pretty high number compared to last year. So, the tax levy impact. Right now, in the rollover budget, early on, the working document, estimate, capital E, 429 is the is what would have to be the levy to make this budget work with the state aid that we've seen. And again, as you all know, the legislature gets a stab at state aid as well. Often that process results in a higher state aid amount. But obviously we don't know what will happen yet. So to get to 3.56, which is our allowable tax levy, we would have to cut from this budget $743,000 today, or add revenue of $743,000. And here's a couple other milestones. If we wanted to get to 2.55% tax levy, we'd have to cut from the current budget $1.7 million to reach 2.55%. And if we wanted to get down to about 2% on our tax levy, we'd have to cut about $2.4 million. Now, in the original slide that you got, we had a typo on here, and that's been fixed. It's been replaced in the library. So in any case, we are right now, very preliminary numbers, we're a distance from 2%, from being able to levy 2%. But again, we haven't heard from the legislature on the state aid yet, and we haven't done all the work we must in this process, although we do have some early returns from TRS and some other places in terms of important inputs to this process. Okay. So speaking of that, here's some of the things we're working with. TRS, we have found out that the TRS rate is going to be 1063. The ERS rate, we don't have a final number on that, but the ERS rate is a little trickier because it's a blended rate depending on what, what's it called? What?
Tier.
Tier. People are in?
Interior.
Yes, tier. Health insurance rates, we have increases in, which we consider material, but you may recall last year we were surprised at the end of the process by some very high health insurance premium rates. So we hope that we don't get to that point again. We have estimated salary increases in. We have debt service, as Beth explained in detail, that we're still working on. We have the governor's proposal. We have building aid on the Second Century project. And then we have in the budget right now an appropriated fund balance of $1 million. Now last year, the board decided at the end of the process to appropriate $2 million to bring our tax levy down to that 1.06 level. And so there's $1 million less in this calculation right now. Obviously another $1 million would change the math significantly. So that's where we started out. And so here's a couple of items that are among the rising costs that we are seeing this year. In the BOCES area, the administrative BOCES budget is going up a lot, $440,000 for us. In the alternative and special areas, $1.1 million, again in the BOCES area. TRS and ERS, debt service, health insurance, again, very early estimate of that. Salary expense, again, an estimate with some contracts, or all the contracts out actually. And so these add up to about $4.8 million. So we have some considerable expense increases that we're working with. Also on the ballot, we will request the creation of a new capital reserve fund. We anticipate that the revenue from the sale of this building might be seed money in that, but that remains to be seen. We've got a capital project that is related to our 5-year plan, and as you all have heard, the renovations at JFK, Edson, and Miller are what's really targeted in that project. And then the election of 3 members of the board on May 15th, a busy day. That's all we've got. Question?
Mrs. Jordan.
I know I'm so thick on this, but the debt service is $660,000, right?
That's an increase in the debt service.
Increase, okay. So our capital projects get approved by the state and for a certain amount of money, right? Why don't we get that money when it's approved so that we can put it in the bank instead of our taxpayers having to pay a debt service on money that the state has approved?
The state, first of all, the voters approve a maximum cost for a project. The state approves the plans and specifications for a project and will aid them up to the maximum cost allowance that's calculated based on building units for the building, and then whatever is determined aidable, which typically isn't 100% of the project.
No, I know that.
Whatever is determined to be aidable is multiplied by your building aid ratio. And that dollar amount is amortized over the number of years for the project. And if it's a reconstruction or renovation project, it's typically 15 years. If you have a project with additions or new constructions is typically 20 years. So you bond to get the cash up front because the state is going to give it to you in increments.
Well, that's my
And you
question.
pay your debt service.
That doesn't seem right to me.
Government's
It
always
just
making
seems
government.
that, doesn't it seem wrong? It seems that they should give us, even if it's the minimum amount that we would get. Because we know that certain of it is able when we go forward with the project. That's how we present the project to the public, that we're going to get back at least this much money, correct? So
And-
shouldn't we get that money?
And we are.
Yes, but we have to pay a debt on it, so
But
really,
it's on the building aid side too, so it's on both sides of the budget. And that's where that capital tax levy comes in. So we're getting, we started the aid flow on the Second Century project this year. In the current year, we're going to be getting aid on the Second Century project. And we'll be paying a debt service on the band that we've borrowed the money for to pay for that.
but we wouldn't have had to borrow that money and pay that debt service.
Let me, Sheila, you play
I
with this?
understand how they do it, I just don't understand, I
Well,
don't
that's
think it's
what
fair.
governments always give you, IOU, pay you down the road.
I don't think the state has enough money.
Oh. Because basically, they're making money on holding that money. And we're paying the debt service on them holding that money.
Well, they're not holding the money, they don't have it.
Well, they don't, well,
Hey,
it's
so
a
say,
promise.
IOU.
It's part of the forward, it's a promise.
But the aid, explain when the aid comes with significant completion, you know.
Right, and then we'll
Well,
get it.
typically it does, but for the Second Century
it's still
project,
costs
we
us
requested early aid, so we're getting it now. So that started, so the process has started, so they amortized that, calculated it over, I think, 20 years. So we'll get aid for the next 20 years, and we'll set up our debt service for the next 20 years and pay it off over the course.
Doesn't seem right.
Windows.
Gotta do more lobby, I mean, nobody, I guess.
I'll be there Monday.
I mean,
No more IOUs.
It would
Any
be-
other questions?
it would be great when we get these big bills from contractors and we approve them, if we could then send them to the state and they would send us a check.
Exactly.
Totally,
Yeah.
Isn't that, that's all I'm saying.
Just
Yeah.
send us on there $37 million and we'd be fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I know several of our board members have been involved in lobbying, involved in, with the legislative committee. We have legislative committee at BOCES, and I know Mrs. Jordan reached out to me this week saying she was going up to Albany, and just, you know, the big picture items are things like more foundation aid. You know, that's a big picture item. Another big picture item for us is that community schools set aside that, you know, requires us to continuously spend that money on new projects that then programs that then the next year we have to sustain. You know, so those are difficult things. Instead of just giving us the foundation and let's put things in place that we think will work for our students, they want to put strings behind that. So those are two issues that I hammer on. But just a couple of things that were brought up today. I mean, the 2% cap on the BOCES. It's interesting that the governor who once touted shared services as the future is taking the only vehicle we have for shared services, which is BOCES, and trying to diminish it. And it happens year after year after year through the budget, and we talk about shared services. We have a vehicle for shared services. It's called BOCES. It works very well. Why would we not support it instead of, you know, try to reduce the the effectiveness of that organization?
Mr. Michael?
Mrs. Warder, you mentioned about the STAR program before. He's already applying for this year's budget, right? Not for future budget. The STAR program, we're getting zero
Yeah.
increase.
We had 2%
Just for this year. Okay.
Right, and that's been brought up pretty much several times in the last few years, and usually doesn't make, but it's, you know, could have an impact in the future.
Well, I guess one of the important, you know, this 2% cap on BOCES aid, or transportation aid, they'll write that into law, and it'll be permanent. it's not a limit on just, it's not just 1 year.
Are you also going to the capital conference?
Yeah, I think it's more logical to protest that than the fact that we don't get paid 100% on the Second Century project the year that voters approve it, because that'll never go.
That's just my personal.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks to Mrs. Wood, of course, and
Thank you.
and Mr. Tucker.
And to the Dexters for staying.
We're not done yet.
And Mr. Campbell.
We need you to get everything.
No, there's I meant for Officer Olson. That is the end of the superintendent's report.
Okay, which brings us to the consent agenda. Are there any resolutions that any trustee would like to remove from the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And that brings us to committees, Board of Education and Policy Committee, and Mrs. Collins.
Okay, thank you. We had, the policy committee met on Friday, February 2nd, and we reviewed a number of new policies and updates recommended by NYSBA. And tonight, we have, first of all, Mr. Porta attached to the agenda the minutes of the policy committee meeting. And tonight, we have two that we're putting forward for first readings. One of them is policy 4321.12, and it deals with use of timeout rooms, physical restraints, and what they call aversives. And it really deals with emergency situations with students who might become out of control. And the TNL, Mr. Verge and his team, the TNL team reviewed this carefully, and with their input, we are putting this forward for a first reading on tonight's agenda. The second policy that's on there for first reading is a policy that we have in place, policy 6700, and Mr. Olson and Ms. Sakai came in, our purchasing agent, to discuss it with us. And the changes are really regarding purchase contracts, et cetera, where we had a limit previously of $1,000, and we're upping that to $2,500, because for a school district our size, I believe the thought was that's where we should be, and it just would expedite things instead of slowing up the process. So those two things are put forward tonight for first readings. On the minutes, there are a couple of other policies that we had discussed that we are looking for some legal advice from Shaw Perelson. And our next meeting will be on March 5th, I believe, is the first Friday for our next meeting.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Collins? Thank you very much, Mrs. Collins. Okay, and that brings us to old business. Is there any old business any trustee would like to raise at this point in time? All right, I have a couple pieces of old business. One is the Distinguished Board of Education, and we need to have a nomination in by the 23rd of February. We have one name that's been forwarded, so if anyone else has a suggestion, please forward it to Robin. And we will be ready to make a final decision at the next meeting. We received a letter about the annual meeting. The BOCES annual meeting is being held Monday, April 9th, 2018 at the Port Huron Educational Center. And the BOCES budget will be forwarded to us prior to that meeting, so take a look at it.
The problem is that it's also conflicts with our coffee and
Okay,
conversation.
so we have a coffee and conversation at the New Progressive Baptist Church on Home Street at 6 PM that evening. This is April 9th, so we would need to have a volunteer or two to handle the coffee and conversation, or see if we can approach them about
I think maybe we could approach them about
changing the date if everyone's
board.
interested in attending the annual meeting.
I think we had
I
signed up for
usually-
that previously.
Okay, so
Couple of us?
maybe we'll just try that first.
Yeah, I think
All right, and then, Dr. Kovowitz contacted, an aide to Mr. Faso, who has contacted us, and he is offering, Mr. Faso is offering to meet with our board, and he gave a number of options. He said sometimes his visit would follow a visit to a high school participation in government class, and the meeting with the board could be held then, at the school. And we're welcome to come to the district office, his district office. It's a little crowded to get the whole board in there. But he is perfectly willing to come to one of the schools. So let me know what your availability is within the next 2 weeks. I'll send out some possible dates, and if you would like to do it at the high school or at the board office, and what questions you would like to present. Okay? And that's after that. And then,
Could you bring Betsy to Boston?
anybody, sorry?
Can you bring Betsy to Boston?
Anybody else have any old business? All right, new business. Any trustee would like to bring up new business? Board member announcements.
So, new
Yes,
business, we have a
new
letter,
business?
we have a letter in about the election for BOCES.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Representative, and my BOCES term is up this year, and I would like consideration for renomination from the board.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
There, that was easy.
No problem, Jim.
Okay. Board member announcements? Mrs. Collins?
I do have one. I went to, I wish Miss Fitch was still here, but I went to J.W. Bailey today for a presentation that was done to the 8th graders. There were 300 8th graders in that room, which, you know, most of us would say, and it was in prep for this TMI event tomorrow night called Locker Room Talk that some of our student athletes have been working on with the TMI project, with Stockade Works, which is backed by Mary Stuart Masterson, you know, which is going to be a documentary, and Tony Porter, who works with the NFL. Since I can't go to tomorrow night's presentation, I had asked Ms. Fitzgerald if I could sit in today, and in some respects it was actually better. It was a little bit more organic, sitting among 8th graders. And to use a cliche, you could hear a pin drop. 7 of our high school students got up there and presented very personal stories having to do with this idea of what it means to be a man. I think it's incredibly timely with everything that's going on in our culture today. I give them an awful lot of credit. I give our 8th graders a lot of credit for listening. Afterwards, it was a dialogue with questions and answers. And it was very heartening. I was very proud of our students. So there is an event tomorrow night in the Wendell Shearer Auditorium. I believe it starts at 7, doors open at 6. It's free, although donations are accepted. It goes from 7 to 9, where these students will be presenting. And I think Kingston is very fortunate to have people like TMI and Stockade Works come in and work with our students on these issues during this time and beginning the dialogue.
Thank you, Mrs. Collins.
Thank you.
Any other board announcements? Yes, Mrs. Jordan.
I had the pleasure of going to Bailey School to be a judge for the food truck race, or food truck competition. And it was just so much fun. It was so great to see such an enthusiastic teacher and his students being so enthusiastic. And all I would recommend, I wish that Ms. Fitzgerald was here because there was so much food to eat. We just kept looking and saying, we can't eat all this food. So we didn't want to hurt their feelings, but next time they should just have like samples and let everybody, all the kids who are watching, eat the food. It was fabulous, and I would imagine they're just going to keep building on it because it was great. And the other thing is I am going to that conference, so if anybody has any concerns that they'd like to forward to me on email, I'll be sure to speak.
Which conference remind us of?
The lobbying effort of
Oh,
Oklahoma.
thank you.
I'm going to that also.
Oh,
Okay. Anyone else attending Capitol Conference? Mr. Shaughnessy and Mrs. Jordan, so let them know if like something conveyed to our legislators. Also, we received a letter from Assemblyman Kevin Cahill asking for input from the board. So the letter is in your library, and please forward input to Mr. Perna or Dr. Carlino. Thank you. Okay, any other board announcements? All right, that brings us to the second opportunity for public participation. Once again, 2 minutes. Speak directly to the microphone. Is there anyone who wishes to? No?
Mrs. Dexter?
All right. Okay, hearing no takers and without a need for a second executive session, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, meeting is adjourned.